Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Sam Callahan from the Callahan Training Group podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about using science and math to find your 100%. With me today, I have two guests with me, actually. I have Keita Busse of 180 Firearms Training, and I have our friend here, Andy Dang. If you guys would like to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hey guys, I am Keita Busse with 180 Firearms Training. I've been coaching mostly movement since 2010 and kind of got into some vision training and other things and built on it. My background is science and nursing. So I've worked with people in hospitals and taught them how to move their bodies efficiently after a surgery or something like that. So that was my focus. I kind of applied sports science and nursing science to the shooting sports. Looking in from the outside, I actually started out as a coach and then eventually took up shooting. And now I'm mostly just coaching.
Yeah, so if you guys have not known Keita, there's a good intro for you. If you guys have been in the shooting sports, that's the quintessential movement coach we all know her as. She's been teaching movement and the science side of shooting since as long as I've been in the sport. So we're gonna touch on some of those things. But Andy, how you doing today, buddy? How is everything with you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm Andy. I'm M class CO in USPSA. I've been doing this for a little over 2 years. Made M about what 4 or 5 months ish ago. Been doing pretty well at majors and been learning on this long journey. Kita is one of my coaches. She taught me back in September. I've known about her for a while, and I've read her book too. And learning her material has been pretty life-changing, to say the least. I had the opportunity to learn with a lot of other teachers too, and just going through it.
Yeah, something Sam and I both do is we recommend people to our students two different coaches because everyone has their own specialty. And there really is kind of a certain timing to where you're at in your learning process as to who you should go to and when. So after my class, I told Andy, okay, now you need this, now you need this. And I'm sending him to other people so he can get better. So if you want to shout out any of your other coaches, go for it.
Yeah. Also, your recommendations have been pretty much accurate, which is kind of scary.
Sam's
I
like, yeah, she reads minds. It's weird.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's pretty
Mhm.
insane.
Oh yeah.
My first coach was Paul Hags. Shout out to
Oh
Paul
yeah.
out in Greece.
He's one of my students as
Uh,
well.
yeah, and then he's featured in your book, of course.
Yes.
And then after that, I learned with Travis Tomasi. After that was Charlie Perez, and then you. And then after that, I joined a PSTG and learned a bit from Kwanzik. That was pretty life-changing. And then recently I learned from Mason Lane.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's quite a list of hitters there. That's pretty awesome. And what's cool about this is there's more and more of these people popping up that have their own little niches, right? They have their own little things, and we could all say, "Hey, I'm great at this, but I'll send you to Kita for movement," and vice versa. So it's
Yeah.
cool. We brought this topic up, and now I think of Kita as like the shooting scientist. That's kind of like what I have thought of her as, like the mathematician in all this. And why I wanted to bring Andy on is because exactly put her science goggles on. But I'm a professional shooter and competitor. I coach full time. Keita does as well. So we kind of get thought of as weirdos that we're special, and we're not special. But Andy is a guy. He's a guy who shoots, and it's not any better or worse than any of the rest of us. But the cool thing that you guys can hear is Andy just said he's a master class in carry optics, but only 4 or 5 months ago you were what, C class or B class?
Yeah, I was like B and A for a while. I was in B for like a year.
So that dreaded B hole, everybody knows it. It's smelly and nobody can get out of it, and it's the biggest gap that everyone gets stuck in. So
Yeah.
what's cool is using math and science is generally how I know Keita trains and how she helped him get out of it. But what I tend to note is with guys like Andy is, did you need to learn anything new, or was it using math and science to kind of understand how to train?
Yeah,
I
like
think he's talking
Kita taught
about
me how to
fundamentals.
what the fundamentals you said.
I
No,
think I think what he's saying is, were you already like a shooter with decent fundamentals, or did you have to completely change your fundamentals to make these changes?
Oh yeah, I'd say well, this is relative to me, but I think my fundamentals are crap, if anything. And funnily enough, learning the math side actually helps your fundamentals because
Oh,
then you can accurately measure like what's going on in the process. And so what part is actually slowing you down or what parts are you actually improving at?
yes. So I like that because we were talked about like, hey, we're going to use classifiers to train on. Are we using classifiers to try to master them? No. Trying to use them to intelligently pick them apart and use the data that's out there to compare ourselves against. And yeah, if you don't really know where your fundamentals stand, first you need to know where they are. You need to know where I am against everybody else. You start using those benchmarks to kind of measure yourself, and then you could say, hey, I can intelligently measure myself. I can intelligently make changes to my fundamentals now that I know how close to or how far I am from certain goals out there. So I like opportunities like this because you could say, well, Andy is self-deprecating as he is as a fundamental shooter, as all of the shooters are. We all think we're crap. If you ever talk to how JJ comes off of a stage, he's never going to be like, I beat the crap out of everybody, but he did. So I'm sure his fundamentals were fine, but what you start to realize is, all right, with a little change in fundamental, but a large change in how I train mentally and how I train scientifically, things start to improve on a more measurable basis. Not just, oh my God, I hit a PR. You're actually starting to see a rise in your skill set, and you can answer why and how, right?
Can you
So
define PR for our
sorry,
listeners?
so I'm a gym guy, personal record. So I'm a big guy that you'll hear me saying, I don't just shoot for PRs. Don't just shoot for PRs. We want PRs. I want you to measure your benchmarks. I want to know where you are, but I want you training for consistency, not PRs. That's a big thing in my world. But that jumping ahead a little bit, really what I wanted to go down to is one of the topics that we were seeing online just recently in one of those Facebook forum groups full of everybody talking about everybody's opinion was how to find your 100%. What is your 100%? How do you find your 100%? So Kita is one of the people that helped me define and figure out where my 100% is and how to push myself. So I just wanted to bring Kita in for her description on how to find your 100%. Kita, do you think you can give a little insight on that? Just using like any classifier as an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we get into that, to preface it, it might be a good idea to have Andy describe his experience with training on classifiers, which a lot of people are told not to do, but there is a way to do it that is useful.
Yes.
If Andy, you'd be willing to share your story.
Yeah, please. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I had first taken Kita's smart move class. And then after that, what I like to do usually with a teacher, if possible, is do a private lesson right after, because then they get a chance to see like what you're like in class, and then instead of using that private lesson time to like find that stuff, they already have it, so you can just get to work right away. Um, for me, what Kita told me afterwards from the lesson is that she knew what I needed was to understand the math stuff because my ability was good enough, but actually applying it and then doing that in execution in the matches is what was needed next. So we had shot a classifier, a simple stand and shoot, and it turns out that when you want to do really well on a classifier, I know like most people do like there's a whole zero to hero thing, but it's kind of like what you said, Sam. It's like that's basically going for a PR. But if you can't do that like 10 out of 10 times, it's like what's the point? It
Mhm.
might as well just be an outlier. And because of the class how
Yeah,
the classification system works, if you can't do that enough times in a row anyways, that score's gonna get dropped.
yeah.
So with this classifier, what we did was we took a look at what the GM score was, what the hit factor was at the 95% level. And then you use an equation to reverse engineer how much time and score you need. So let's say, for example, the classifier I was on, like it needed a 6, right? And then we know that to calculate hit factor, you have points divided by time. Any given course of fire has a theoretical maximum amount of points that you can ever get. The only real thing that's being measured that technically goes to infinity is time. Let's say this particular classifier has 60 points. If I know that it is 60 points and I know that the GM hit factor I need is 6, then you can determine how much time you need in order to execute on that stage and then get a GM score. Now, this, of course, presumes that you get all alphas.
Mhm.
But oftentimes what I found was it's a lot easier to get all those alphas at a given certain time than try to drop like some Charlies here and there, but make it like really hard on yourself. Because the amount of time you actually need to execute on, given a certain amount of Charlies, sometimes it's like straight up unreasonable.
Mhm.
So knowing that, it's like, oh no, I didn't need to zero or hero this classifier at all. I could have just, spent 0.03 seconds on each shot, getting a little more confirmation, assuring that alpha, and I still would have gotten a GM run, which
Mhm.
I thought was really interesting because I never thought about it that way before until Kita told me.
So I really like
Yeah.
that because I had the same ride as a rising shooter where you're not supposed to practice classifiers, everybody told me. And I took that to heart and I never did. And I just practiced everything else. And what they failed to talk about was the why. Why? I don't want to practice El Presidente to be good at El Presidente. I
Mhm.
get that. I agree with you. But why wouldn't I practice El Presidente the way you just presented? Well, I have a certain amount of time to accomplish a task, and I'm just going to measure myself against that and shoot all alphas. And kind of my joke to all my students then is instead of trying to drop Charlies for time, why don't we just practice shooting all alphas? And well, don't we get better at anything we do over and over again? Don't we get faster at anything we do over and over again? So if you just set yourself a reasonable time limit to shoot your all alpha run, you take a little bit of pressure off yourself. You give yourself a process to focus on rather than a product to focus on. And all of a sudden, hey, results get better. And you can then get to know yourself a little bit better, as I put it. You get to know what your draw is around between here and here. I know my transitions are between here and here. I know my splits are between here and here. And you could start to actually think about the process you're going to apply to the time given rather than go, all right, I got 2 Charlies and I'm going to send it. That's not proper. And I say that because that's not how you're applying your performance to stages or any other problem. So why do we shoot classifiers like that? So it's interesting to see stuff like that.
So I find for a lot of my students that have good fundamentals and they're just really pushing that speed and letting themselves drop points, the only thing they have to really flip in their brain is just shoot how you shoot and trust you're going to be fast enough. Just execute and trust that the speed is going to be there from your training. Well, how do you know it's going to be there? Well, you have a standardized drill, and that standardized drill tells you your low-hanging fruit. It tells you what you need to practice. If you look at your run on a classifier, you can see, oh, these transitions were 1.2 seconds and they're only, 30 degrees apart or whatever. Okay, well, maybe I need to pick up those transitions. You can see what numbers are looking off that you can pick up a little bit. Or maybe my draw was 2 seconds on a stand and shoot. Well, that's too long. Okay, I need to work on my draw. Of course, the draw only happens once a stage. So there are other things, obviously transitions, you do a lot more than a draw, but yeah, you have to practice everything. But if your draw is ridiculously long, obviously that's what you're going to work on for a little bit, but keep rotating your skills.
Yeah, so faster isn't always the right word, but it's not harmful if, say, your draw is slow and the rest is fine. You could say, well, we need to figure out a way to go faster in the draw. That's okay. How do we go faster? Well, I think fast is a dirty word. It's just one of those. Figure out something to do.
The F word.
Yeah, it really is. I tell a lot of my students that I view fast and slow as bad 4-letter words. They're not good because they're indescribable. They're indefinable. My fast, I'm from New Jersey. I talk pretty fast. You know what I mean? It's a little different than other people. So fast and slow, yeah, they're bad words. But I like that because you could start to say, well, that's not a desirable time. Like at some point you say that's slower than a desirable speed. And instead of trying to shoot all of El Presidente faster, why don't I just work on getting a better first draw and then let the rest of my skills go there? And then I like this style of training too, because you know what your grandmaster score is, but if I'm trying to crack grandmaster, that's very important to me. But I have a lot of students who are just trying to make A class. I'm like, all right, well,
Yeah.
why are we going to try to shoot this classifier at a grandmaster time? Why don't we shoot it at an A class time? So why don't we find out what 95% is? Why don't we find out what 70% is? So we have an alpha. And then we know, hey, you have, instead of 10 seconds, you have 12 seconds to shoot this. You're not going to try to hit this grandmaster. You're trying to make A class out of B class. And it makes the training a lot more focused in that regard. So instead of trying to say, well, I'm going to PR El Presidente today I'm going to figure out how to get a better turn and draw. And I'm going to figure out how to shoot El Presidente under 5 seconds. Doesn't need to be at 3.2. You need to figure out how to hit A class first, because you don't go from C class to master class. You don't do that
Unless you're Andy
unless
Dang.
you're Andy. Well, there's always
Well-
there's exceptions to the rule. We're talking the average person who just picked up their gun and they're just going to start doing the right thing, right? Sometimes we get stuck in a hole. That's just the way this sport works, and that's where Kita comes in, and that's where people come in. We're kind of funny because these videos, these podcasts, our training, our teaching is like the worst business plan ever. It's like the worst business ever, because we're trying to give you the tools and training to never talk to me. I'm trying to give you, like, here's how you never come to my class. Here's how you never come to Kita class. Now, we know full-fledged that's not true, and that's not going to happen because people aren't perfect, but we're talking about theoretically, if this person just shot it from a D class level and just said, okay, how do I get to C class? All right, now how do I get to B class? How do I get to A class? That person's unstoppable. You can't stop that person. They're analytical, they're scientific, they're goal-oriented. Well,
So Andy, I would really like you to share with the listeners the variation on standardized drills that we did. How we added in not just you shoot the classifier, but can you explain the variation on a classifier concept that we did?
Oh yeah. If I remember right, we intentionally made it harder for a few reasons. One of them is, to see how we stood on that particular fundamental that we added in. Like, for example, when we did, it was normally just a wrist below belt, looking down range, but then we threw in a turn and draw, and then we threw in a reload. It's sort of like wearing a weight vest, I guess. Adding that difficulty, and then but still trying to make the time, like the GM
Yeah.
time from before. So you don't get to add time just because you have to do a turn and draw. No, you have to execute the exact same way. I thought it was pretty interesting because you had to still understand how to execute within that constraint, even though you have a lot more difficulty added to that particular classifier.
I love that.
And
So I
some-
describe that as practicing classifiers by not practicing classifiers.
Yeah,
If you're going to shoot El Presidente and you're sitting there and you're having a really hard time, this sounds counterintuitive, but walk back to 25 yards and go shoot it at 25 yards. And
so
just
there's
get good at 25 yards and come back to 7 yards.
there's another reason for doing that. If you're shooting at 7 yards, a lot of people are going to be thinking, go fast, go fast, go fast. And then what happens? You get really tense and you start sending shots low and stuff like that, doing all kinds of crazy things. So if you back up to, I don't know, 18 yards or so, what do you have to do? You have to relax a little bit to get those hits. You can't be sending shots low. You're not going to hit the target from that distance. So then you go back to 7 yards after that and carry that feeling with you, and it completely changes how you shoot the classifier.
So that's a funny word, that feeling word, because I've actually had to use this as a descriptor lately. Is you can't just be a slave to your timer. You can't be. You have to know what the feeling felt like too. So that's where, man, you can't just be going for a PR all the time. You have to be going for consistency, and that's a big part of it. What did you just feel? What did you feel? What did you feel? Did that feel good? Did that feel not good? What did you feel? Now go forward and just feel that again. The timer is there to measure time. You're there to do a process, have a feeling, see some stuff, whatever it is to you. And it's hard to convince yourself on your 15th run of El Presidente at 7 yards to remember to, like, oh yeah, it's hard to relax. So instead of sitting there and repping it out, change something, make it harder, step back to 25 yards. Like Andy said, just make the start position worse. Start unloaded. And well, I'm not going to have the fastest time ever, so let me just do things correct. All right, cool. Good thing.
And that's a great segue into the finding your 100%, because really what that is sort of ascribing a number to a feeling. So what is your 100%? I don't know. And it's always different and it's always changing. Well, how do you give that a number? Well, you're giving a feeling a number and then seeing if it can be replicated. If it can be replicated at what you feel is your 100% and you're consistently doing it there, okay, that is your 100%. Is it going to stay there? Hopefully not. Hopefully you're going to get better and the bar is going to keep moving. So you do the same setup a few different times and you go like as hard as you can with, if you go over 100%, big mistakes are going to happen. On the line of 100%, yeah, little mistakes are probably going to happen. But if you go over 100%, which theoretically is not possible, of course, but you know, that means you're pushing beyond what you can do. 100% is 100% of your current skill level.
Mhm.
And that's what you're trying to put a number on. Because if you're talking about dialing back your skill number, let's say you're at the World Shoot and you have all this anxiety you brought with you from all these years of preparing for this match, and you traveled across the world, put all this money and time into it, you're on stage one, day one, you're going to be feeling some pressure. So that's one of those times you might want to dial it back. Dial it back from what? Well, now you have to know you're 100% at that current time for yourself, for your skill level. So if you haven't figured out about what your 100% feels like and given it a number, then you don't know exactly how much you're dialing it back by. And Andy, we did this as well, right? Do you remember doing that? I know it's been a few months.
Yeah, I do have vague memories of it.
But I like that style of training too, because you start to realize, all right, there's my potential, there's my potential. And then you can answer another question. Well, we're not perfect. Potential between what? What's my top and bottom consistent number on this? And you could start to plan on, hey, I can count on this draw being between this and that number. And I know that because I know I've done the science. I know it. I know that transition will be between this and that. So do you need to be perfect? No. But you know what good enough feels like. And then if you know what good enough feels like, I always, when I show up to majors, I like to think day one, stage one, about 85 to 90%. I'm not going to try to shoot that first stage at 100%. It generally just doesn't go well for me. But how do I know what 85% feels like? What does 90% feel like? It's a feeling. It's not a number. It's a number I can verify later, but it's not a number that I'm producing. It's just a feeling I'm producing. How do you know that? Well, you need to know how to come up and be able to shoot your first stage and get that good boost in confidence for the rest of the match. So I shoot at 90% that first stage, but I get 100% alphas. All right, I'm pretty confident to push it into the rest of the day. I'm pretty ready to go for it. But if I show up and I just shoot and I just see what happens, that first stage might not go well. And it's not that the first stage is going to bury me. It's that confidence is going to sink, and the feeling of that first stage not going well is going to carry for the rest of the day. And I don't have any science to lean on. I just have feelings to lean on. And that doesn't work very well.
Yeah, once you get those first stage jitters out of the way, maybe first two stages, you're feeling a little more confident. You're like, okay, I need to amp it up a little bit or I'm going to be behind. So then you say, okay, I'm going to take it from 90 to 95. Well, how do you know what that is? Well, it's because you practice it, you run your numbers, you know your draw, you know your transitions, you know your splits, you know what you're doing at different distances and difficulties, moving targets, your move times, all those things. You keep track of all these numbers.
And then it's fun in this regard too, because if then I'm chasing somebody at a major, or if I need to make up some time, I know what 105% theoretically feels like. I know what I need to go feels like, because if I'm not going to win this match unless I get above this person, well, I'm not coming here to win second. I don't care if I get third or second. I want to get first. Well, I need to push for 105%. I need to know what, not too fast,
Letting the wheels
know
fall
what
off feels like.
105% feels like. I need to know what riding the edge feels like. And then I need to also be able to do the math. Is it worth it on this stage? So if
Right.
it's a 10 hit factor stage and all the targets are dead open, yeah, I'm going to push to 105%. I'm going to see if I can get away with the Charlie, a Delta, maybe even a Mike fast enough. But if it's a 25-yard stage, if it's a classifier, if it's a standardized stage, am I going to push to 105%? Probably not. I'm probably going to try to shoot more alphas than the next guy. So then you could start to say, well, knowing the science and knowing this math can actually set my strategy stage per stage. I'm not going to change how I shoot. I'm going to change how I apply my skills to this stage.
Yeah, and that's where acceptable deviation comes in as well. So let's say you pick 95%. Well, if you're at 95%, that means you're taking a little bit more risk. If you're at 90%, you're taking a little bit less risk. It's always risk versus reward.
Mm-hmm.
If you're at 100%, you know little mistakes are going to happen, or maybe even bigger ones. You might be dropping points, which is not a mistake you want, obviously. But yeah, let's say you want to be at 95% and just a given, drill that you practice on. Let's say you're getting a hit factor of 12 consistently. That's what we want to see. If you're getting 12 one time and a 15 the next time and an 8 the next time, that is not an acceptable deviation. A good rule of thumb is an acceptable deviation is about a hit factor of 1. Of course, that depends on the stage because, we have high hit factor, low hit factor. So it varies, but I do have a formula for this, but a rule of thumb, if you suck at math, is you don't want to see more than a hit factor 1 deviation.
Mhm. I like this then, because then that's going right back to what we're looking for, consistency over hitting one magical personal record and then not ever hitting it again for that practice session or for the day or whatever it is. It's trying to learn, like I said, the feeling of this feels good and tying that to a maximum hit factor. If you got a maximum hit factor and you don't know what it felt like, or worse, it felt chaotic, you can't really replicate that. So it becomes a useless data point. It becomes an outlier, like Andy said earlier. You might as well think of it as an outlier. If you could do it once every 10 times, can you really do it, or did you get lucky? Luck isn't the right word for it, but like the pieces came together at once. I want you to be able to put the pieces together. I don't want fate to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, and another thing is being able to do it on a cold run. So a cold run can be just changing one thing from one run to the next. Maybe just your hand start position, or maybe you switch directions or whatever.
Yeah.
So it becomes a cold run score, even though you're pretty much doing the same thing.
So this is big too, because I talk about a lot of my people for efficiency and training. And hey, setting up a classifier is pretty efficient. It's normally 3 targets, standing still, maybe a little bit of movement. So even physically, that's just an efficient setup. Now, for efficient training, yeah, I want to get a consistent run. I say get my best 3 or 4 runs one direction, but go back to how does Eric Fell trained? He never does the same setup ever, like multiple times. So it's not so much that I'm trying to confuse my brain or something. I'm just saying, hey, if my turn and draw is always 1.2 seconds and my transition is always this, it shouldn't matter if I start on the left target or the right target. I am consistently that good. So I like to use I always use El Presidente as like the quintessential example. It's just the example of classifier. But if I could do El Presidente left to right, I should be able to do it the exact same way, right to left. I should be able to do the same thing if I turned and draw and shot 3, 2, 1, because transitions are there. All the shots are the same shot count. It's 6 shots. All the transitions are there. So I'll mess with my clients like that. I'll say, all right, shoot El Presidente, and we're going to shoot it 3 times for your average. And now we're going to shoot it backwards, whatever your least favorite direction is. And now we're going to shoot it 1, 2, 3, reload 3, 2, 1. And now I'm going to keep changing stuff. But guess what? All those things on those the timer, all the data points are in there. So we're not trying to hit a PR on El Presidente. I'm trying to hit the same 10 hit factor, 12 hit factor, no matter which way you splice it. Because that to me says I have mastered the skills within the classifier. I didn't master El Pres left to right. I don't think that's a very useful thing.
Yeah, and another thing I do with my students is I will measure their percentage of deviation over time. So you might start at a 300% deviation on average, but what I want to see is that percentage get closer and closer and closer to 0.
Yeah.
And you should be able to look at a stage and predict what your hit factor is going to be approximately within about a hit factor of 1 or less, right? And you get to the point at the top levels where you're not just doing that for you, you're doing it for your competition, and you're having discussions about this. Like Sam and I teach a class together. I set up a drill that I made and I say, Sam, you're going to shoot that in a hit factor of 14. He's like, okay. And he does it.
And it's just because she's like, well, I know the draw is going to be here and I know the splits are going to be here. So why wouldn't that be possible? And then
because I know his skill level.
Yeah. And then every shooter should at least know themselves that well. Your coach should know you that well. That's
your coach should know you that well. If your coach can't tell you what your hit factor should be for your skill level, they need to work with you some more.
Have a discussion. Yeah, because that's a big thing. I know I have one student, Richard, so I always use Richard as an example when we're talking. Like I know what Richard's draw is generally going to be. I know what his splits and transitions are generally going to be. So he should be here and I should be able to push you to there, which is fun because we're talking at like a super high, crazy level. But for any average shooter, I mean, average is not even the right word because Andy, you're a masterclass shooter. That's a high percentage shooter. You shoot at a high level. Did you really need to learn a new draw, or did you need to get your draw incredibly consistent?
A little bit of both, but mainly the latter.
Yeah. So I like
Because
this.
what it
No, so
helps you
exactly.
find a
What you said
no,
earlier
you
is
go.
interesting because you said, well, I'm going to change my fundamentals based on having this stuff. So do you change your draw? Maybe a little bit, but because of that consistency part, I'm going to change my draw. I'm going to change, say, my hand position on this draw, not because I'm faster, but because I more consistently get a better draw. And now Andy's got a better draw based on consistency, not on just trying to hit PRs.
Right.
Right, and the numbers tell the story. Because what I change is it needs to serve consistency, and like the result that comes after is a secondary.
Yes, it's evident. So I like this because we're using a lot of, like, we're dancing around a lot of fancy sciencey words that the rest of the world use. Like, we're shooters, and for some reason we think like muscles and like tough and fast and all that stuff matters, and it doesn't at all. It just doesn't. So I liked all this because we're talking basically, any scientist would be listening to this go, yeah, stupid, you're talking about the scientific method. You're talking about run tests, theory, have data, and then you have a hypothesis based off the data. And that's what we're trying to do here. And it's like, why are we trying so hard to reinvent the wheel? Let's just use science that's out there. And that's why I love Kita in all this, because hey, she's gone back and she was a nurse, so she understands exercise science. She has looked up the eyesight stuff that we're about to start talking about. She has the science to back the data. Pretty simple. Why are we trying to make this harder? Your ego and your muscles don't have anything to do with this sport.
So not to put you on the spot, Andy, but how has it gone working with these numbers since then, using them for your training and in matches?
I basically have my own system of match mathematics that I can apply to just about anything, and it's a pretty big advantage. I know my friends, they rib me for this because, for example, when I train, like I do something called 20-minute doubles. I do a double and then I think about it for 20 minutes, like, for exactly what happened. But yeah, when you bring this match math to matches, it's sort of like understanding what the assignment's asking of you. So if you look at a stage and you look at what the stage winner's hit factor is, you also, with match math, there's a theoretical ceiling as to what hit factor you can get at a certain time. And so you can see if there's a gap, that means, oh, I can lead this guy by this amount of stage points if I know I can do it. But on some stages where it's like, if everyone's already hitting the ceiling, it's like, okay, why am I trying to push? If everyone's getting this, this is just gain your points, and this is not an opportunity to take the lead.
I love
So
I think it also takes some of the emotion out of it.
Thank you. That's
Because
Mhm.
when you focus on math and the process, you're not thinking as much about a feeling or anxiety or, oh, I want to do really well, or letting yourself down. You're kind of removing the emotion and giving yourself a tactic
Mhm.
focus on.
Yeah, I like that. So we train by feeling, we get a measurement, and then we could depend on that measurement. And then what you're saying is I can base my stage plans, or what I kind of describe it as my style. You shoot your own style now based on your feeling and your math. So I've got guys where I'll step up to a stage and there's a 2-yard target and there's a 100-yard target. And I know I'm drawn to the 100-yard target and then shooting the 2-yard. And I know my buddy's going to shoot to the 2-yard and then shoot the 100-yard target. Why? Well, the way we train. I know consistently I do better one way. He consistently does better the other way. We're both going to lean on our strengths. We're both going to basically have a theory or a hypothesis that we're going to lean on. And it's based on the science. And really who wins is just who knows themselves better. Obviously skill matters, but equal skill, it's just who knows themselves better.
So Sam, I know this is a little off topic, but can you talk just a little bit about that kind of a hump you go through in masterclass?
So I found what's funny is I match bumped to master. I refuse to shoot classifiers till I hit master class. So I'm going to talk about the master to grandmaster bump, basically that hump to get over. And
Yes.
I was very annoyed by it because this whole, by the way, this whole podcast, this whole topic is because of what I'm about to talk about. So I hit masterclass via match bumps, which was just effort. I didn't have any smart training. I would take a class a time or two a year. Like I would take Kita's class and JJ's class, right? With that in my brain and just hitting my head against the chalkboard enough times, I got to masterclass. But then to get over the next hump, effort wasn't it. It was going to be the kind of pulling my own game apart and understanding what I needed to work on because of low-hanging fruit. This is the key to phrase. I can first of all use this segmented training to understand, oh, it's not that I need to go faster, it's that I need to do this thing better. And then if I do this thing better, I get the good results, which means I need to be consistently good at this and consistently good at this. So I didn't need to learn anything new to become a grandmaster. I needed to polish my masterclass game to a scientific level that I could depend on what happened. So not only did I need to just understand these numbers, I needed to understand these numbers so deeply that when I stepped up to shoot a classifier, it was just like, I saw this last week and I got this, no problem. It wasn't being better to be a grandmaster shooter. It was like calming down almost. It was like locking in, understanding exactly the science behind this. And it takes the hurry up and go out of it. And it's just like, well, I can depend on this. My training is faster. I have this floor level of skill. My performance bubble is so high now that even at the bottom of my performance level, it's still grandmaster. Okay, let me relax now and just do my job instead of let me do my job. It was, no, I'm just going to shoot now. And it was a big deal to see because I fought for like 2 seasons to get out of master. And then once I finally hit grandmaster, I like threw my hands up and I was like, really? That was it? That's all I needed to do? So it's interesting because now this is how I train everybody. These last 2 seasons have really changed because I'm not trying to get people to go faster, 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 faster. I'm trying to get you as consistent as humanly possible. And then I kind of use the same analogy in the gym as I do in shooting. You don't get stronger by lifting 25s harder than the next guy. You lift the 25 more consistently than the next guy. If you show up every day and you lift those 25s, it becomes easy. It becomes normal. And then 30s become normal. And then 40s become normal. And then 50s become normal. It's not me going and getting mad and flexing into things. It's me doing it consistently. And it was like, oh, duh. Oh, okay. That's more of what it is. It's consistently training correctly. Because if you're picking up weights and you're doing really bad form to get one single PR, are you actually getting better? No, you're not. But if you just do good form and you lift 25s, which is like a B class weight, and you just keep doing that, what happens? You eventually hit A class weight. You eventually, and it classes up. So I looked at it as consistency over effort. Consistency over volume is really my big thing. So you hear all my dry fire people hear this too, is I don't want you to try to dry fire an hour a day. I want you to dry fire for 15 minutes as thoughtful as humanly possible, as analytical and focusing on one thing, focusing on how do I feel and how does this feeling tie to a number?
Yeah, and then at a match, just trusting your training, trusting the speed is going to be there and do what you need to do it correctly. Don't, like you said, go for that PR.
There's no need to. You've done it. You've seen the numbers. You've seen that even if I relax, it's here. If I try really hard, it's here. So I just need to do my job. I just need to do my job. I just need to do my job. But you can't tell yourself just do your job if you don't know all the parts of the job. If you didn't rip apart the classifier, if you just got a PR on a classifier one time and then you say, okay, do it again, and you don't know how to do it, you feel anxiety. But I tell this to my students all the time. Hey, that went really well. Just do it again. And it always happens the second time. It gets better. Every single time. If you shoot a classifier and it's the best classifier I've ever shot, and I'm like, hey man, that was awesome. Can you just duplicate that? Just do that again. Even if it's slower, just do it again. And they do it again, it's always better. It's always faster. Why? Because the anxiety isn't there anymore. You're just like, I know how to do that. I know I can do that. So I like reshoots for that regard. Reshoots are like my favorite thing ever because I already saw this. I mean, I get to go again. That feels unfair. No one else got to go again. Yeah, cool. I'll just do it again. Cool. So I like more looks at things. I like more data. I like more thoughts. I know it's supposed to be shut up and just let your brain do it, but I like to have a lot of things to think about that keep me from the anxiety and stress.
I will say though, the reshoots a lot of times for other people go the other way because they did already do it, but you have to approach that like you never shot that before and give it the same respect as though you never saw it before.
Just do it again, not better, because that's the big thing. You don't have to shoot.
Yeah, they're trying to beat they're trying to beat their last score.
No, don't have to. Just go do it again. And that style training is awesome because it keeps you from doing anything inconsistent, trying too hard or not trying hard. Hey, just do it again. Just do it again. Just do it again. And then what did I say? Do it again. Feel it again. Feel it again. Feel it again. Feel it again. At the end of that run, if the number is the same, good job. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So it becomes interesting because it's very mystery. I get the term pew pew guru thrown at me sometimes because I talk like Mr. Miyagi, like just paint the fence and just wax the car. And then when the fight pops up, you're just like, whoa, how did I block my face? It's just the way this works. You're just trying to kind of not think about it harder than you need to. And a good coach will help you not think about it too hard. It's up to us to try to take the effort off of you and just be like, hey, just try this. Just do this. Just do this. But if you don't have one of us, now you kind of can understand the how it works. You can understand the how to pull things apart. Just try to be consistent and measure yourself and be able to depend on things. But as far as all this goes, it's all well and good. But what most people then try to do is one thing. They try to grip the gun harder or fast. They try to do something more aggressive. And instead of trying to do something physically aggressive, I try to recommend people to do something mentally more aggressive. And this is another topic I brought Kita in, is pick a tiny spot on a target and start being really, really aggressive with your eyesight. So something I started working with Kita, what, in 2016, 17, whenever we first started, she was teaching what was called the quiet eye. So would you like to talk the quiet eye before I mangle it with my words?
Yeah, well, a lot of times I'll have someone who's in that, masterclass state trying to make GM, and they're, like you said, banging their head against the wall, just trying to get faster. And then I ask them, well, what did you see? And they're like, I have no idea. And I can tell them exactly what they saw, but then I have them shoot it again. And I say, after you shoot this, I'm going to ask you again, what did you see? And they don't necessarily have to slow down their shooting. They just become more aware of what they're seeing. And then suddenly their hits get better.
Mm-hmm.
But then you do always have to kind of push yourself till the wheels fall off, till you feel like you're not seeing anything. And that's how your eyes start getting faster at seeing it. But always be asking that question, well, what did I see after every run?
So learning to see faster is a phrase I use all the time, and it's hard to define, but that's exactly what I mean. Is I need you to learn to see faster. Well, I didn't see anything. Well, what were you looking at? I don't know is not a good answer.
Well, I can watch your eyes and tell you exactly what you were looking at. So I was a nurse and obviously had that background. So went through nursing school, did some things with vision as a nurse, but I also worked with right eye and took a training course. So they have these they have this expensive $19,000 hardware software combo where they put it on your eyes and it tells you what your eyes are doing. So I just learned how to do that because I couldn't afford a $19,000 machine. So I just learned how to watch people's eyes and know what's going on. And it's been kind of interesting diagnosing vision problems over the last several years.
Yeah, I will say I have two students now who one now knows that his eyes, I forget what the condition is, but only one can focus at a time.
Yes.
He had no idea until we started doing this. The other guy has a convergence issue. His eyes converge about 8 feet before the target actually is there. So if you say
And that's slow.
occlude him, he's shooting 8 feet off to the left every single time because his eyes are lying to him. But hey, wouldn't have figured this out without this little piece of knowledge. Thank you, Kita.
No problem. Yeah, I've looked at people's eyes, and I had one guy in Washington State where I saw his sclera was extremely thick, and I was like, ooh, you have really bad eyes, but you had it corrected. And then he was staring at his targets every time he shot him, and I was like, did you have your vision overcorrected? And he said, yeah, how'd you know that? And I said, because you're staring at the holes in the target every time you shoot them. So yeah, just little weird things like that. It's really creepy when I watch your eyes and tell you what you're seeing. Yeah, I did that with you, Andy.
Yeah, it's actually pretty uncanny because it's like you're standing off to the side, but you see in like full detail like what our eyes are doing.
Yes.
I was like, wait, what?
That look is the most common, like, why are you in my brain? Like that is the most common Kita class thing that every single class. I'll never forget we were shooting one of your eyesight training. It's the 5 target drill. And right before I shot, it was like, stand by. I looked over at this target and looked back and then shot the drill. And she's like, yeah, but right before you shot, you looked over there. So when the beep went off, you're looking over here. And I was just like, what the hell? Like, what? Why did you know that? And she's like, yeah, it was you. And it didn't, she was right. But what hit me is how important every little eye movement was. And the big thing that she got into my brain was quiet eye. Quiet eye meaning pick specific spots, draw lines to those spots, use eye science that we know, saccades. There's a lot of these things out there that we know of. But what's going on YouTube right now is everybody's talking about spot focus and everybody's talking about target focus. And I'm like, hey, sounds weirdly familiar. Sounds like specifically
Well,
like somebody's been yelling at me to pick a specific spot on target and then a specific spot on target over there. She's been telling me to do that for like 8 years. Weird. It's crazy that that is prevalent still. It's so prevalent because it's such a challenge is what I've found.
it
So
is.
the whole first half of this, we talked about how to physically go through this and physically, okay, go harder, go faster, measure this, measure that, measure this. But what if you're doing all that and you can't do any more? Well, this is the next thing. It's mentally, it's visually. Start picking a thing to look at and start asking myself, am I looking at a brown target? Am I looking at the alpha? Or am I looking at a spot this big? Because the quiet eye that Keita taught me was essentially that your eyes are going to jump around no matter what. So if I pick a tiny little spot and my eyes jump around in here, it's pretty hard to miss that little spot. So the thing that I always ask Keita then is like, well, if I'm going to pick that tiny spot, isn't it going to slow me down? No, it doesn't. It's very counterintuitive, but no matter what, your eyes are going to pick a spot to shoot at.
We all have the same size focal point. It's just a matter of how spread out are those focal points.
Picking the right one, basically. So it's up to you then to pick the right ones and to focus on the right ones and to stay focused on the right ones. Not that you need to do anything specifically different. You just need to start actually using your eyes and using your biology the way they're designed to be used.
So I am not the one who invented this, made it up, created it. I just researched that was already done and proven. Joan Vickers, give her a lot of credit.
That's the
God
name.
rest her
I couldn't
soul.
come up with that name. Thank you.
She is a kinesiologist who started all this in 2007. So I just followed her research and it was applied to all these different sports, including shooting. So
Yes.
it was all there already. We just weren't doing it.
Yeah, I don't know why
USPSA,
we're so
it's the
obsessed
guided
with
PA.
reinventing the wheel. The shooters love reinventing the wheel. Like we know better and we're smarter and we need to like make it different for shooting and we don't. And that's why I liked your approach to all this because, well, that degree that comes with that
Kinesiology.
that degree comes with a lot of science and money and research that we haven't touched in the shooting world. So why don't we use that? Why don't we use that science and use that data? So
Yeah,
I'm
it's
a big
already
fan
there.
of-
We
yeah,
just
it's-
have to do it.
So that would a big thing that struck me in all this is like, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Why don't we just go back? Like I played lacrosse, so why don't we use sports science? I remember how to play lacrosse. I remember all these things. None of this sounds new. It just sounds like we're applying it to guns. That's all.
So one of the most interesting things is, typically when we look at a target, our eyes are jumping all over the place to take in the image of the target. And then we all pick our spot, this big in the middle of the alpha. But the difference between the average shooter and the elite shooter is for the average shooter, that spot is the area where to shoot. But for the elite shooter, it's not where to shoot, it's when to shoot. Once you enter into that area, that's when you pick your spot. I mean, that's when you're focusing in on just one single focal point. With everything being even, let's say everyone has 20/20 vision, that focal point is the same size for everyone. So it's about the size of a paster at 18 yards. It's about the size of a 4 MOA dot at 5 yards. So that focal point gets bigger the farther away the target is. But all you're doing is stopping your eyes with one focal point so it's not jumping all over and using a saccade to get to that spot and ignoring all irrelevant visual information like the edge of the target or maybe a plate rack that's not in play on the stage.
So you're telling me tracking your dot's a bad thing then, huh?
Well, that is a smooth visual pursuit, which is the slowest eye movement. A saccade is the fastest eye movement. So if you're tracking your dot, yeah, we do need that for moving targets, but it's the slowest eye movement, but it's the only way to follow a moving target.
But I hear people get all obsessed with like my dot in recoil is doing this. I'm like, stop looking at it. Stop looking at it, dude. Stop looking at it. Look at the spot on the target.
Look at the
Does
target.
the dot come back to that spot? That's all I care. That's the only question I'm asking you. Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be another thing too, is how consistent is the way your dot is returning. That's something where you might want to tweak something fundamentals based.
Yeah, so
because
this
you
is where
want it
we're
to
like
return
what Andy
in a
was saying, where you
manner.
might adjust your fundamentals based on the way you're seeing the science happen. Like if I want to shoot really
Right.
fast, but my dot isn't appearing the second time as well as I'd like to, well, I might need to adjust actually my body position, my index to change how that dot returns. And then did I need to go faster on this? No, I needed to realize that holding the gun a certain way got it to return a certain way. And this style of training, just breaking it down and taking it apart piece by piece, I call it segmented training, just segmenting it into pieces. Segmented training is just the way to actually attack your own weaknesses. And then that's why I like coaching as the word from myself and Kita, because instruction is me speaking to 80 people generally, just basically the same phrases. Coaching, because I coach CrossFit, stand up and here's the workout, but I'm going to coach this guy way different than I'm going to coach this guy to get the same results. That's what we're doing. Is I'm saying, well, Andy might need to work on his eye movement, and this guy might need to work on his grip. They're both shooting the same points at the same classifier in the same time.
I think
That's the
Andy's
confusing
doing
part of all
both.
this. And then we go on Facebook and you're like, what's the best this and what's the best that and what's the best time? And it doesn't work like that. It doesn't, you have to
No.
get a deeper understanding. This isn't a here's your magic card.
The
This is how you
sliding
get
scale.
That's not how it works. I wish it was. I regrettably been the guy to ask Tim Herron, had Timmy out, right? I was masterclass shooter. I had hosted a bunch of A class and lower. So we finished the class and I go, okay, Timmy, now what's my secret? Now that you gave it all to them, what's my secret? And he's just like, dude. And I was like, all right, I get it. All right, I get it. I just wanted to see. I just tested. But I was like, all right, so really it's not any, it's that I'm just a different version of everybody else. Nobody's special, nobody's different. We're all humans, we're all shooting guns, so they all dots on.
So, I'd like to hear from Andy. How's the vision training been going?
It's been going really good, actually. So just for context, after I took the Mason Lane class, I realized that I was missing a good portion of my understanding of what reactive shooting should have been, but
Mhm.
also consequently, it showed me that I was missing a lot of vision. I was treating vision often somewhat predictively, especially in transitions. Um, Visual fixation is something that I've been working on lately. It's like not just finding the spot, like you were saying, Sam, but also staying there. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
like being like hyper aware if number one, my eye is getting onto the dot and like wanting to follow it instead of like staying onto the target. That's been my big thing. And funny you mentioned like changing fundamentals. I don't know if other people do this, but one thing I've been doing recently is changing how I index my sight. I know like there's like the whole like center hold thing or whatever, but I've been sort of treating my dot like with a slightly like 6 o'clock hold-ish because I figured if my dot is like in my line of sight and I decide to put my dot where my line of sight is, I'm basically putting myself in a situation where I have to choose between my dot and the target. But instead, what I'm doing is I'm using like slightly above the dot is where I look and align to my vision on the target. And so I don't have to contend with that anymore. I just look at the target. And then if I know my dot is like sitting right below where I'm looking at, that it's my shots are going to go there.
That's
I might be
interesting.
saying something pretty controversial right now, but
No, that's
it's
that's
interesting.
okay. You know, a lot
No,
of people
so
are
I'm a
doing
big
dot
person.
occlusion and
No, so I'm weird on the whole. I don't care what your zero is. You got to know your dope. This came from 3 gun because everybody had an opinion on whose zero is the best and what was the best. And I don't care what your zero is. Do you know where your shots hit at all times? So if that does your job of there's my spot, there's my dot, and you could stay focused on your spot and shoot when the dot arrives, I don't see that as an issue because you're talking the difference between like maybe an inch.
but
Like
you
on the
know where
target.
that could become a problem, right?
Now, yes, this is the only problem.
yeah.
It's distance, it's precision where it's going to become an issue. But that's like when I say know your dope. If you just know where to put that dot at the right time, there's never a bad thing. It's just I it, I I have an opinion that as long as you have a why and it works for you, there's never a wrong answer. There's some stupid shit to do out there, but I don't think that's stupid. I don't think that's I think that's just I think that's interesting because I've had somebody describe the opposite where they have a dot at 12 o'clock and they always put the dot at the top of whatever they're going to shoot. And I was just like, interesting. I've never heard that before. So this is now the second time I've heard this kind of recently. It's
Yeah, I think it depends on how your brain works and how it's wired. So it varies from person to person. But I would look at that as almost like a training wheel for most people. You don't want to go to like the world shoot necessarily and have your dot be at 6 o'clock. So I would personally look at it more as a training wheel to just find your spot, find your spot, find your spot. So that when the dot is superimposed, it's just that superimposed.
And
It's
then
not
kind of like,
pulling your
you're
eye.
saying it's kind of like occlusion, where once you can do it, you get rid of
Right.
it, and then you just make sure nothing changes.
You're
You just-
training how your eyes work right now.
Yeah.
That's how I would look at it. And then I would eventually try reintroducing the dot where you
Dial it
wouldn't
up.
really have it, but you know, that's up to you. And it's gonna really mess you up at first when you do it.
I mean, I'm already messed up by trying to do this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's
it's
all,
just retraining how your eyes find your spot on the target, right? It's kind of like dot occlusion.
but yeah,
Yeah,
I like,
ultimately, I wanted to learn like the visual acquisition aspect because it's like when you saccade over to the next target, first of all, you're supposed to program that.
Yeah.
And so there's partly a determination whether was that a failure in visualization, or is it like actually something like you need to like train to do.
that's a good point,
Both.
because are people like, yeah, it's a, both is honestly the answer, because did you fail to pick a spot and then a saccade to that spot, or did you fail to execute that saccade? You'll never execute if you didn't pick it. So that's the first thing, is like, first of all, you gotta be like, there's low hanging fruit there, but if you are picking the spot, that's interesting. Yeah, both is really the answer, but that's not a good answer.
Well, think about in a video game, you're not programming your spots. That's total reactive shooting.
Yeah,
You're finding your
great.
spot.
and I like that
as
too,
the
because you're
target
saying
presents itself.
reactive, and it is
Yeah.
reactive because it's not pre-programmed, but it's not slow either. Because I've never shot a zombie in Call of Duty slowly. It doesn't,
Right.
even though it was reactive, I didn't know where it was. I had to find it first. That's an interesting way to put it, because, that's a interesting way to look
Did
at
I
the
just
word.
break you, Sam?
Well, I have such a hard time with those predictive reactive. I have hard to like, I like JJ's attack control way of talking about it, because it's such a broad way to put attack control that it not defining it. Now I have so many people, I'm not saying that terminology is wrong, predictive reactive. I just have so many people confused by it.
Yeah,
So
it's
many people misinterpret it and then try to shoot like, well, I'm gonna shoot this target predictively and this target reactively. And I'm like, that's all right, you're not getting this. You're not understanding this.
so there's predictive, there's reactive, and there's an area in between. And this has been in science for decades. Like this is not a new thing.
Again, thank you for saying that. And yes, yes.
You can go look up predictive, reactive, and
And that's
the
why I want to
spectrum
be
in
clear
between.
that nobody's using like the people pushing that aren't incorrect. It's how it's being absorbed is incorrect from what I've found.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a disconnect for
Yeah.
some people trying to understand
And
it.
also, having been in some of the classes that the guys who teach predictive and reactive, it's not a 10-minute YouTube video like some people are learning it from. It's an hour and a half thing that's a progression. So people are missing the front end and the back end of the talk of predictive and reactive, and it's confusing people from what I found. It's not, so I try not to use the terminology only because, well, it's not my terminology, but it's confusing people because I don't have the time to go into it.
Well, it's a common knowledge concept that's been out there in science for decades.
Yes.
So it's not that you're stealing anyone's anything.
Yeah.
It's just something that's been used for forever that's now suddenly being applied to shooting, where it's like, well, why wasn't this here before? Well, it was. JJ was teaching attack and control, which is pretty much the same thing. But it's weird to me that the middle part is missing.
Well, it's like the closest person I hear
As
talk
someone who worked in science.
I feel Steve Anderson is as close to the middle with his match mode talk as possible.
Yeah.
But it's not as drill oriented as predictive reactive or any of the other attack control concepts out there.
Yeah, predictive is like, you got a 5-yard target. I predict that if I have a proper grip and I'm looking at the spot I want to hit, my bullet's gonna go there.
and it's
I
all
can get away with slapping the trigger a little bit.
you're basically saying my
Or-
grip is good enough to support the fact that this theory will, and that's going back to the science I was talking about. I have a theory supported by data that I can then depend on. It's not that, well, it's a 5-yard target, so it is a reactive target or it is a predictive target. That's not how it works. You have to know the feeling, you have to have the data, you have to have the actual science behind it. But it's basically what I find in all this is none of this is new. It's interesting, and that's
Yeah,
why I
it's
like
not.
that's why I like the you and the JJs of the world, because like none of this is new. You guys did the extra work of finding the science outside of the shooting world and dragging it inward.
Yeah,
JJ uses
Yeah,
a lot of
JJ does
exercise
that.
science. Yeah, he uses a lot of exercise and movement science, and like, this is why I do this, and this is why I move. You use so much movement science from the PT side of things. You use so much mental and eyesight training from like the Joan Vickers and the nursing side of things, that it's cool to just see that, hey, stop overcomplicating shooting. Stop trying to make it its own sport, and just let's train it intelligently like we train every other high level sport.
Yeah, let's just look at the science that's already been proven and just
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, like it's out there. Just apply it. Now it might take a little while to apply it. Like, we might need to figure out how to apply it. But
Yeah,
stop
there's
trying
an
to- yeah.
experimental phase for
Because
sure.
that's the big thing I keep showing a lot of people in our sport too, is like, we're new. This is like, this
Yeah.
only got popular in like 2012. I know it's been around for much longer, but like, how long has USPSA been not thought of as like the nerd sport? I don't know, not very long. So like, now that it's like getting popular out there, we're a new sport, brand new sport. We just need to catch up to the rest of the sports out there. We need to catch up. If pickleball and cornhole can be on ESPN, there's zero reason we shouldn't be taking that seriously. We should be taking it that seriously. We should look into it that hard. We shouldn't be looking at this sport as some dumb little sport that doesn't really matter, because pickleball doesn't matter either, but somehow there's guys out there perfecting their forehand and all this kind of stuff. This is the same kind of thing. Let's just apply the science. Is pickleball new? No, tennis exists. But is it the new craze? Yeah. So occlusion, is it new? 1980s when the ACOGs were out, they were doing that, right? Is any of this movement science new? Any of this eyesight stuff? We have yet to discuss any novel concept on this whole time. None of this has been some new thing that some shooter figured out. So it's kind of interesting, because you're looking at like, well, hey, if we use science and we use math to find our 100%, it takes away a lot of ego, it takes away a lot of opinion, and you just play by the rules. That's JJ's big thing, right? He plans by the rules. You just, well, my skill set says I do this or I do this. Stop having opinions. So I like this conversation, because it, as scientific as it is, as nerdy and mathematical as it is, it's a simpler way to start looking at things, because there is no more emotion and there is no guessing. Do what the numbers say. Do what the data says. What do you feel like? What does that say? And now there's plenty of people out there like Kita who teach this kind of stuff out there doing classes, and you could catch her around the country. She's going to be a double eagle teaching this exact thing with me. And you could catch a lot of guys like Andy that, oh my God, this works. It works. It's not some one-off random item. I've never met Andy before this conversation. This isn't some like setup. I didn't know, like, me and Kita were talking about this, and she's like, oh, I just worked with somebody on this exact topic and it just worked. So
Yeah. And
this just is, it's applicable. It's applicable across everything.
And I think with shooting as well as science in general, the rabbit hole is deep. And it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper the further you get in. And I'm one of those coaches where I'll give you what you need right now, and I'll wait till, okay, we got that. Okay, here's what's next. Okay, here's what's next. I'm not going to throw everything all at you all at once and overwhelm you. But I think Andy is now starting to realize, oh, it just keeps on getting deeper.
Yeah,
And then
this
I'm
is
sending him to all these other people like, okay, you're ready for this class right now. Go take it.
Mhm.
It
But
never ends.
No, that's the best way to look at it though, because if I mean, we're talking about classifiers. What are all our classifier data held up against? Last year's best shooter. And that is all, like, JJ doesn't stop PRing classifiers that we have to come again. So it's not like me, Andy, and Kita are weird. That's at the top of it's every day, get a little bit better, do this a little bit more. Are we doing anything new? No. I use the same analogy I use in the gym. Just go to the gym. You don't need to invent a new lift. You need to be more consistent than the next guy.
Well,
And
I'm
then-
weird in the shooting sports because I'm a coach.
Yes.
I have them in every other sport, but people think it's so weird that I'm just a coach.
Actually, it's an interesting way to wrap this up. Why I started this and why I found Kita was I was a sporting clay kid. And after my first round of sporting clays, you suck. You go to the clubhouse, there's a pro, and you ask him to schedule a lesson. Well, I finished my first USPSA match and I go, all right, so who's the pro? And everybody laughed at me. And I mean it, like, laughed at me. Like, the fuck is this kid talking about? Coach? Nobody coaches this. And I'm looking around, I'm going, guys, you have like $5,000 worth of gear on your hips right now. You drove here to be here for 9 hours. Don't tell me you don't take this seriously. There just isn't a coach. And that was in 2012 when I think 2 people were doing it. And now, what do you know? There's coaches for this now. And we don't call ourselves instructors. We call ourselves coaches because this is a sport. Everyone's a lot different. but the fundamentals are the same. And we can kind of see this as just like basketball or football. There's a rabbit hole you can follow forever. You think Kobe was just Kobe because he didn't care? Like he wasn't just better than other people. You hear all the stories about that guy. He just outworked other people. He didn't play
Yeah.
the game harder. He did everything else harder. He was consistent and he was focused and he dry fired and he did blah, 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 blah. And you could just start hearing all that stuff in our sport. So it's interesting because like this math and science thing almost feels new, but it's like shooters are finally taking a dumb hood off and we're like, okay, let's do this intelligently now. So, I mean, thanks to people like Kita for teaching the movement side of things and the eyesight side of things. And like, I'm trying to disseminate that kind of thing through my students now too. And the same way, when I've run into a student who really needs movement training, well, guess what? Kita's going to be here in July, right? And
Yep.
so Kita's class in July, sign up for, we're going to do a 2-day thing on how to move intelligently and how to train intelligently. And that's the way this all goes now. It's got to be approach from a professional standpoint. I believe that wholeheartedly. You could always do, I mean, take any hobby not seriously, but if you want to take it seriously, approach it seriously, go to one of these classes, find a coach, listen to some of these people out there. Like you said, Juansik. Juansik's one of those great resources out there. Mason Lane, the whole PTSG guys, like all of those. There's a lot of us out there, but beware who you take in the information from. Make sure you're listening. I don't know. I'll say to people who have proven results. Kita has literally coached world champions. I'd listen to a coach like that. If you are an A-class shooter and you've never really gone to a major, I probably wouldn't listen to that guy. So take that for what it's worth. But yeah. So thank you guys for coming on. I could talk about this forever, so I'll cut it here because I'm a giant nerd in this whole USPSA world, and like I just am obsessed with always getting better and faster and stronger and all that kind of stuff. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate both your perspective.
I'd like to add for our July class, if you're someone who has injuries, you're in a wheelchair, anything like that, that's my specialty. Come see me. I'm happy to work with you and help you figure out how to move more comfortably and efficiently and reduce any pain.
Yeah, all those people who say I would like to do USPSA, but I'm not athletic or I'm injured. This is literally the person who will get you into. I've seen we've had amputees at our classes. We've had people who have had neck fusion surgeries. Literally, name it. I know Kita's seen it. So don't worry about it. Don't be intimidated. We will get the best out of you possible.
Andy, thank you so much for being here and sharing your journey with everyone.
Of course, happy to be on.
Yeah,
this was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you sticking on and adding with as much as I talk. I know. Thank you for adding in. It's good to hear from like the regular shooter, not the guy who's out on. I came from the range. I'm going to the range. You know what I mean? You have a normal job. You're a normal person, but you're a masterclass shooter, so it's possible. And now, how long do you think you got GM? What, a couple months?
I'd like to do it within this year. That is a goal.
That's right there. Everybody heard it. I like that. Why? Well, I have the way to train. I know my numbers. I'm going to dry fire every day. Hell yeah, man. That's what I like to hear right there.
Okay, so not to put words in his mouth or anything, I do fully 100% believe he could make GM right now if he chose to. However, I talked to him about the masterclass hump.
Don't rush it.
And I was like, yeah, just stay where you are. There are a few things you got to work through first. You don't want to work through them as a GM. Just, it's better to stay where you are for right now. But yeah, I mean, could he shoot a GM classifier right now on command? Yeah. But do you want to be competing as a GM?
Yes.
Probably not yet. Get a little more experience.
That's awesome though, because that's an intelligent way to train. That's an intelligent way to look at it. You don't want to set your goals too high. You also don't want to be lazy about it. So it's good.
That's a completely separate conversation. That would be a good topic for the future, I feel like.
Yeah, realistic goals, because I've got some people who want to be a GM this year and then I've got some guys who are like, I don't think I'll ever make GM, and they're almost as good as me, but I don't want to tell them that. But
yeah, your goals should be attainable, but just out of reach for now.
Yeah. Good. Well, that might be the next topic. I might have you on again, and we'll do that again. But I think I think we actually talked more than an hour, which I try to keep it about an hour. So thank you guys for coming on. I seriously appreciate you guys adding to not just me sitting here and droning on by myself. So thank you guys. And as always, don't forget to dry fire.